Chapter 7 of The Giant Killer, or The Battle Which All Must Fight, by Charlotte Maria Tucker. This LibriVox is in the public domain. Recording by Lynne Thompson. Chapter 7. Sunday at Dove's Nest. "Oh, let me love this blessed day, the best of all the 7," were the words which came into Bertha's mind as she opened her eyes on the Sabbath morning. "Ah, I am afraid that I shall not do so to–day," was her next feeling. "When mamma was with us, singing hymns and reading the Bible to us, and telling us all about holy things, then, indeed, Sunday was a happy day. But now I expect nothing but difficulties. I am sure that the Probyns will not care to do as we have done, and they will not be kept to lessons with papa as they are on week–days. Mamma took our Sunday teaching herself. Oh, what shall we do without her?" And for the first time in her life on a Sunday morning, Bertha wished that the evening had come. Yet the sun shone out so brightly, the rain–drops which hung from the fresh green leaves danced so gaily in his beams, and the flowers gave out such a delicious scent, that it seemed wrong to be dull and anxious when all nature was rejoicing around. Then Bertha had the comfort of hearing that her mother had passed a tolerable night, that her head was greatly relieved, and her fever almost subdued. Laura's face looked like sunshine itself. Aleck's manner was even kinder than usual. The breakfast went pleasantly over, and nothing occurred to give a feeling of discomfort till, Mr. Roby having retired to his study, his children and the Probyns were left in the sitting–room together. "We had better go on as if mamma were with us," said Bertha softly to her brother, unclasping her little pocket–Bible. "We can repeat our texts to each other." Aleck looked doubtfully at the Probyns, who were carelessly turning over some books which lay on the table. "We shall hardly get them to do anything," said he. "I wonder if they have ever learned the catechism?" "They won't repeat it to us if they have. We must just do what is right, and leave them alone." "I will go to my own room," said Aleck, rising and taking his Bible with him. "Laura, come, and I will show you what verse you should learn, and hear your catechism up–stairs," said Bertha, as soon as her brother had departed. Laura was looking over the pictures in the children's paper with Adolphus, and seemed rather unwilling to move. "You'd rather stay with us, wouldn't you, Lautie?" said he, playfully pinching her rosy cheek. "Laura, when dear mamma is not well, we ought to act just as if her eye were on us," cried Bertha, with some emotion in her tone. "She does not want your preaching. She is not your slave," cried Constantine, in an insolent, provoking manner, which brought the colour up to the very temples of Bertha. "Perhaps I ought to go," whispered Laura, trying to disengage her little hand from that of Adolphus, but he only held it tighter. "Laura, you know how naughty it is," began Bertha, but Constantine again cut her short. "If you mean to set yourself up as mistress here, you will find yourself pretty much mistaken. You'll please to march off double–quick," and suiting his action to his words, he pushed her rudely out of the room. Bertha ran up–stairs, almost choking with passion, hot tears overflowing her eyes, burning feelings of anger in her heart. She was ashamed in her excited state to appear before either her mother or Aleck, so, rushing into her own little room, she flung herself down on her bed, and buried her face in her hands. "Oh, I do hate them! I can't help hating them! I wish, oh, how I wish that they had never come here! I was wanting so much to do what was right, to be a comfort to mamma, and to take care of Laura. What a trial this is! I shall never bear it. I'd rather live on bread and water than go on in this way." She sat up on her bed, and as she did so caught a sight of her own brown face reflected in a glass. She dashed away the tears directly. "Aleck must not see me. He would think that mamma was worse. Oh, what an ungrateful girl I am!" she cried suddenly, "when my precious mother is so much better, to let anything fret me thus. If she had been very ill, dangerously ill, oh, that would have been a trial indeed. I must do what papa tells us so often to do, think of my blessings rather than of my vexations. He says that in every trial which is sent us faith will discover some good. I wonder what good there can be in this, what good can come from these Probyns being here?" Again Bertha rested her head on the pillow, but she was now a great deal more calm. She thought of her mother's words, "They are teaching you to know yourself," and she felt that the last few days had certainly given her insight into her own heart, such as she had never possessed before. "Perhaps, also, I needed my patience to be more exercised," thought she. "I require a great deal of it now, but it is hard to have such a constant struggle, no peace, no quiet, no comfort. Ah, perhaps this is what mamma means to teach us in the story of the champion Fides. He was not allowed to rest and be idle. When he had conquered one enemy, he had instantly to prepare for some brave attack upon another. Perhaps life may be a fight all the way through. I never thought of that before." Bertha's reflections were broken in upon by a little soft hand that was gently laid upon hers. "I came as soon as I could, indeed I did," said Laura, "but they were so full of play. Oh, you have been crying, Bertie," she added, as she saw her sister's face. "Dear, dear Bertie, I'm so sorry. I'll come directly next time." The little arms were pressed close around Bertha's neck, and the curly head rested on her bosom. A quiet, peaceful half hour was spent together by the sisters. Bertha seemed quite to have recovered her usual tone of mind. A short time was then passed with their mother, after which the whole family, with the exception of the invalid, proceeded to the church of which Mr. Roby was the minister. "Here, at least, there will be peace," thought Bertha, as she entered the walls of the ivy–mantled building, and heard the sweet tones of the hymn. But alas, even in the house of prayer, unworthy, unholy thoughts will too often intrude. Bertha, accustomed to perfect reverence and quiet behaviour in church, was annoyed beyond measure at the conduct of the Probyns. Constantine was fidgeting, staring about him, turning round on his seat. Adolphus yawned loudly and repeatedly during the sermon, though preached by her own venerated father. The angry emotion which took possession of Bertha's mind quite destroyed all peaceful enjoyment of the service; while Aleck, though apparently following the prayers very devoutly, as he was accustomed to do, was scarcely conscious of the act in which he was engaged, but was passing secret comments in his own mind on the shocking behaviour of his companions. He was wondering at the neglect of the parents who had brought them up, thinking how he would act towards them were he in the place of his father, devising plans of very rigid discipline, which, as it seemed to him, ought to be adopted; and in short, was unconsciously quite as inattentive a listener to the prayers as those whom he so strongly condemned. This was no longer the case, however, as soon as the sermon commenced. With his eye fixed upon his father, and his ear drinking in every word which he uttered, Aleck forgot even the presence of the Probyns. "You must know the sermon by heart, for you neither winked nor moved a finger from beginning to end, while I was almost asleep," laughed Adolphus, as the children proceeded home together from church. "I always write out as much as I can remember of the sermon between the two services," replied Aleck, who was secretly a little proud of his talent in this way. "I write it out, and so does Bertha." "Oh, I do but little," said his sister, who was ever on her guard against untruth, even in his least startling disguise. "Sometimes I only put down the text." "I shall do less," observed Adolphus, "for I shan't put down anything at all." "You spoke of two services," said Constantine. You don't mean to say that you go to church twice?" "Laura does not, she is too little, but we who are older are allowed to do so," replied Aleck, with a little testiness in his manner. "Oh, but we don't want to be allowed," laughed Constantine. "I should say that we've had enough for one day." "We'll stay at home with little Laura," cried Adolphus. Aleck gave a meaning glance at Bertha. They both felt hurt at the indifference shown to the preaching of their beloved father, and they easily mistook this sentiment for one of indignation at the Probyns' carelessness on the subject of religion. After dinner Aleck went to his room to write down the sermon, as usual, while Laura and Bertha enjoyed a quiet, happy time with their mother, who, greatly recovered, was now able to sit up a little in her armchair. Then, when the soft, musical church bells summoned again to the house of prayer, Aleck and Bertha proceeded with their father along the green pathway, overshadowed with elm trees, which led to the little church. Bertha was happier during this service than she had been in the morning. But still, though the Probyns were not present to distract her mind from holier things, she often found her thoughts wandering to the subject which so painfully engaged her now. "Aleck," said she to her brother, as they walked quietly home together, Mr. Roby having remained behind to have some conversation with the schoolmaster, "Aleck, do you not find it hard not to dislike the Probyns?" "I do not dislike, I despise them," was Aleck's reply. Bertha said no more, but walked on, wondering to herself whether it were as wrong to despise as to dislike, and whether those who were as good and clever as Aleck might not look down on the ignorant and ill–behaved. Her reflections were disturbed by an exclamation from her brother as he swung back their green door and caught sight of the lawn. There were Pro and Con, in riotous mirth, rushing along, as far as the narrow space would permit, with the painted kite floating in air above them, and little Laura racing at their heels, joining her merry voice to theirs. "Sunday! A clergyman's lawn! A pretty sight for all the village!" cried Aleck, running hastily forward. His indignation was greatly increased by his well–founded suspicion that the tail of the kite, which had been left unfinished the night before for want of paper, had been supplied from the pages of one of his own well–written copies. "You forget where you are! You forget what day it is!" he exclaimed, laying his hand angrily on the string to drag down the kite. "Take that for your meddling!" cried Constantine, turning fiercely round and striking young Roby in the face. The blow was instantly returned, and the next moment the two boys were engaged in a fight. Aleck knew nothing of boxing, and had never had a battle before. His blows were ill–aimed, and though taller than his opponent, he very soon felt himself overmatched. Adolphus stood by, cheering on his brother, and laughing at the misery of poor Laura and Bertha, who, at the unaccustomed and, to them, most terrible sight, ran about in an agony of distress, imploring the boys to desist, and calling out for some one to part them. Aleck was on the ground. He struggled up again, his face all streaming with blood. Bertha, almost wild at the sight, rushed forward, and clung to the arm of Constantine, again raised to strike at her brother. "Unfair! Unfair!" gasped Constantine. "Unfair! 2-1!" echoed Adolphus. "Shame on you, boys!" cried a manly voice, which the children recognised as Mr. Roby's. With two ladies at his side, he now stood by the lawn, and the sound of the window hastily opened above showed that his wife also, alarmed at the sounds from below, was a spectator of the painful scene. In a moment the two combatants fell back, and stood panting, flushed and excited, with their hands still clenched, and their lips compressed, but their eyes turned towards Mr. Roby. "What is all this about?" said the clergyman, sternly. He had to repeat the question before a reply was given, but then a torrent of answers burst forth at once from all the children, each eager to tell his own story. "He hit me! He insulted me! He was tearing down our kite! Oh, papa, only see how Aleck has been treated. Send them away. Send those cruel, cruel boys away." Laura and Bertha could scarcely speak through their tears. "I will examine into this. Both parties shall be heard. Constantine and Adolphus, retire at once into my study. Aleck, you had better go into your own room, and let Susan see to your hurts. I am grieved that this should have happened at any time, but, above all, that it should have occurred on a day when you have all met together in the house of prayer." Aleck, holding his handkerchief to his face, and followed by his sisters, ran into the house, and was met on the stairs by Mrs. Roby, looking very pale indeed, but more composed than her daughters. She drew him into the room which she had just quitted. "Laura, ask Susan to bring some hot water. Bertha, my love, you must not agitate yourself thus. I trust that we shall see little injury is done. He will soon be all right again." "I am so vexed, mother, at anything occurring to annoy or fatigue you when you are not well," exclaimed Aleck, as Mrs. Roby, with her cold, trembling fingers, gently bathed his face with warm water. "Oh, look at his poor eye!" exclaimed the terrified Laura. "Will it ever get like the other again?" "Does it hurt you very much, dearest Aleck?" cried Bertha. "Oh, I don't care for the pain," muttered Aleck. "If only he had not had the best of it! But to be beaten by such a boy! Well, the time may come." The rest of the sentence could not be heard, but his mother guessed its meaning very well. "A time may come," she said in her own gentle tones, "when my Aleck may be victor in a far bolder fight." "Oh, mamma!" cried Bertha, "surely he acted nobly. He only fought that wicked boy because he was doing what was wrong." "If we fight everyone who does wrong," replied Mrs. Roby, with a faint smile, "we must have to give battle to the whole world, and as we must begin with ourselves, I think that we had better proceed no further till we are conquerors there. Now, my boy, I hear your father calling you downstairs. As your hurts have been attended to, you can go to him at once. I trust that this will be the last time that any of his children will cause him this pain and alarm." Aleck departed, and Laura stood crying at the end of the couch, upon which her mother had reclined herself again. "Mamma, I was so naughty," she sobbed. "I would not go with them at first, but somehow I forgot." "You forgot your parents' wishes and your own duty, my Laura. But you are so unhappy already, you have suffered so much, that I will say no more on the subject. Go and look over your pretty children's paper, my love, and if you could learn a little verse from my favourite hymn, it would be nice employment for Sunday evening." Mrs. Roby's voice was growing faint. Laura bent over to kiss her mother, and left a warm tear on her cheek. Bertha remained in the room, silent and thoughtful, wondering what was going on in the study, and what punishment her father would inflict on the offender. "I hope that he will be flogged," at length she exclaimed, unconsciously uttering her thoughts aloud. "I do not think so," said Mrs. Roby. "I believe that your father intends to pass over the first offence. Besides, your brother may have given provocation." "The first offence!" exclaimed Bertha, her face full of anxiety, almost amounting to terror. "Why, mamma, Con won't be allowed to stop here to fight any more. He will be sent away to–morrow morning. I'm sure that he will. Won't he be sent away, mamma?" she continued in an earnest, imploring tone. "I do not think so," was again Mrs. Roby's reply. "Oh, but this is dreadful, dreadful!" cried Bertha, clasping her hands. "He will owe Aleck such a grudge, and they sleep in the same room, and they will be always fighting, with no one to interfere, for Pro is just as bad as his brother. Oh, mamma, if you had only seen him standing by, and laughing, and shouting out, 'Give it to him!' and 'Hit him in the eye!'" Bertha's words were interrupted by her tears. "We shall find some means, my love, of stopping all this. Fighting shall not be permitted in this house. It ill becomes any Christian home, above all the dwelling of a minister of the gospel of peace." Bertha had sunk down her head upon her hands. She now raised it, tears streaming from her eyes. "Mamma, I shall be afraid even to say my prayers as long as these Probyns are allowed to stay here." "To say your prayers?" repeated Mrs. Roby in some surprise. "You have told me that I dare not ask to be forgiven if I do not forgive, and I cannot forgive Constantine Probyn." "Bertha, can a Christian child utter such a word?" "I know that it is wrong, but I cannot help it. I struggled to keep down my angry spirit as long as he was only unkind to me, but to see my own darling brother treated in that way, it is more than any one could bear." "My child, the stronger this feeling is in your heart, the more you need to have the assistance of prayer. Have you asked for a spirit of forgiveness?" Bertha hung down her head in silence. "Have you asked that a better heart be given to those whose faults cause so much pain?" "Pray for the Probyns! Oh, I should never have thought of doing that. I despair of their ever changing." "That despair arises from want of faith. Their faults have been nurtured by indulgence. The soil, I grant you, is overrun with weeds, but that is no reason why we should give up its culture in despair. We must soften the hard ground by kindness. We must pray for a blessing on our labours. We must work on in patience, forgiveness, and love, and who knows how great our reward may be at last?" "Do you really believe it possible that these Probyns can ever become like Aleck?" "Quite possible, my dear, and not unlikely, I trust. We shall have something to bear from them at first. We must look for no sudden change. But even if they were never to improve, if they were to remain our daily trial for years, should not we, in performing our duty towards them, find a sweet satisfaction in the thought that we had not suffered our own passions to master us, that we had fought a good fight with the secret foe within?" Chapter 8.